because sitting on the kitchen counter like a bomb was a thick envelope, cream-colored, wax-sealed, and heavy with meaning. Her name was handwritten across the front in a bold, familiar scrawl. Harvey Delacroix. Hello, my amazing, wonderful, and brand new subscribers watching right now. I'm truly grateful we've made it through the past month, and here we are, welcoming a brand new chapter together. It fills me with joy to know that we are here, united, happy, and connected in this moment. Before we go any further, let me pause and share with you a heartfelt prayer for this new month, a blessing from my heart to yours. As we step into this new month of September, I pray for you, my dear subscribers, that love surrounds your days and peace fills your nights. May every sunrise bring hope, and every twilight wrap you in comfort and gratitude. May your hearts be open to joy, your paths lit with clarity, and your dreams guided by divine grace. Let September unfold with blessings you didn't expect but deeply deserve. May love be your anchor, kindness your language, and serenity your gift. Here's to a month of light, laughter, and endless possibilities. Amen. She didn't have to open it. She knew. Her body knew. That quiet thrum in her rib cage? That wasn't anxiety. That was memory. That was 3 years of silence collapsing under the weight of one envelope. Her fingers trembled, but she peeled it open. Gold foil, embossed lettering, a wedding invitation, his wedding. Her name was listed under special guest, beneath the names of their twin daughters, Rosie and Remy Delacroix. Tucked inside was a handwritten note. His handwriting, his arrogance, his power game wrapped in pleasantries. Dear Briar, I hope you're well. I'm getting married. I thought it only right that Rosie and Remy see their father celebrate love once more. Your presence would complete the picture. It would mean a great deal to me, and to them. Warm regards, Harvey. She let the note fall to the table like a shard of glass. Complete the picture? This man once stood before an altar, promised her forever, kissed her while the world applauded. Now he wanted her to show up as a chapter marker in his next story. She looked up at the ceiling, biting down the familiar sting behind her eyes. She wasn't going to cry. Not for him. Not again. From the hallway, little Remy peeked in. Mommy. Briar answered, masking the storm in her voice. Is that from Daddy? Briar nodded slowly. Rosie appeared beside her twin. Are we going to see him? A pause. Briar looked at their hopeful faces, 2 soft brown faces with Harvey's cheekbones in her eyes, and she smiled. But it wasn't warm. It was steel. Yes, she said gently. We're going. Briar didn't need to ask why Harvey had invited her. Optics. Control. Spectacle. He wanted to parade the ex-wife who'd moved on gracefully. The twins he didn't raise but claimed. The image of closure wrapped in couture. He expected humility. He would get presents. She folded the invitation, placed it inside a drawer, and walked to her bedroom, pausing briefly at the mirror. Her reflection stared back, high cheekbones, dark coiled hair, skin kissed by strength and sunlight, and eyes that had forgotten how to beg. This wasn't the woman who cried in that marble bathroom 3 years ago. This was the woman who raised 2 daughters alone, built a consulting firm from dust, and healed without anyone watching. If he wanted a performance, she'd give him the whole damn show. But this time, she wasn't stepping into his world to be devoured. She was stepping in to remind him who built it. The invitation stayed in her drawer, unopened again, but never out of mind. It was like it pulsed under the wood, radiating something ugly and unfinished. That night, long after the twins had fallen asleep, one curled into the other like matching puzzle pieces, Briar stood by her window, wrapped in a silk robe, eyes tracing the city skyline. She wasn't crying, but she wasn't calm either. She sipped from a glass of wine that had long since gone warm, watching. The lights blink across the buildings like arrogant little secrets. Her mind, against her will, wandered back. 3 years ago, the night she left. She had stood in that same robe, only in a home 20 times this size. The Delacroix estate, all polished glass and echoing halls. The kind of place where silence sounded expensive. Harvey had just gotten off a video call with Beijing. He barely looked up when she approached with tears in her eyes and a suitcase by her side. Where are you going? He'd asked, still typing. Where I met her, she'd whispered. He blinked. We're in the middle of a product merger. I'm in the middle of falling apart. She'd waited for him to put down the phone, to follow, to fight. He didn't. He simply nodded once. If that's what you want, not love, not rage, just silence. Back in the present, Briar pressed her forehead to the glass. She remembered packing that night. 1 suitcase, 2 children, no dignity left, but a lot of fear. The hardest part wasn't leaving Harvey. It was unlearning him. For years, she'd dimmed herself to fit into his world. Every fundraiser she chaired, every gala she attended, she wore the role of CEO's wife like a glove lined with thorns. She remembered one particularly bitter evening. The company had just hit a new billion-dollar valuation. Harvey threw a rooftop celebration. The media called him a genius. But no one asked who designed the investor pitch decks, who trained the client-facing team, who coached him through his TED Talk nerves. Briar had. She was always there, quietly excellent, steadily invisible, until one day she wasn't. A month after leaving, she launched her consultancy from her godmother's garage. No investors, no headlines, just grit. The first client paid in cash, the second in referrals. By the end of the year, her firm had 4 employees, 12 contracts, and 0 regrets. She didn't rise out of spite. She rose out of refusal to let his indifference define her worth. And now, 3 years later, Harvey wanted her in the front row of his next performance. Dignified, decorative, dismissible. He didn't know. He didn't know who he had invited. He had invited the woman he left behind, but she was sending the woman she became. Briar didn't tell anyone right away. Not her best friend, not her assistant, not even the twins. Some decisions didn't need committee votes. They needed silence and clarity. She placed the envelope on her nightstand, beside her watch and a half-read novel. Every morning it reminded her, this wasn't about him. It was about her. The following Monday, she canceled her meetings for the week. She called a stylist, one who didn't post photos on Instagram. She arranged for a private car to pick her and the girls up under an alias. She requested 2 custom dresses for the twins, ivory silk, silver threaded, just like the ones they always admired on bridal mannequins. She wasn't rushing the moment. She was sculpting it. Rosie twirled in her new dress, giggling. Do we get to wear tiaras too? Briar smiled, zipping up Remy's back. Yes, baby, you're royalty. Remy tilted her head. Will Daddy like it? Briar paused. She knelt between them and placed a hand on each of their tiny shoulders. We're not dressing to impress anyone, she said gently. We're dressing to remember who we are. 2 nights before the wedding, Briar stood alone in front of a full-length mirror at the Four Seasons. The gown lay across the bed, deep crimson, sculpted to command. Her stylist had called it dangerous. She called it earned. Every curve that man once ignored was now highlighted with unapologetic elegance. Her skin gleamed. Her curls cascaded. Her heels were 5 inches of don't try me. She wasn't coming to cry. She wasn't coming to whisper. She wasn't even coming to talk. She was coming to exist. Fully, loudly, without apology. The night before the ceremony, she called the girls into her hotel bed. All 3 curled under the thick duvet, watching cartoons, eating popcorn. Mom, Rosie asked, her voice small. Yes, love? Are you nervous to see Daddy? Briar paused, then kissed her daughter's forehead. Not nervous, she said softly. Just ready. Remy leaned into her side. You look like a queen. Briar blinked away the ache in her throat. Because I am one. 2 days before the wedding, Briar arrived in the city. Not with noise, not with fanfare, but with precision. The Four Seasons concierge smiled politely as she checked in under the name Celeste Johnson. Her ID was an alias. Her reservation paid in advance, suite prepped with blackout curtains and no calls allowed through. The girls had no idea what was really happening. All they knew was that Mommy said they were going on a special trip to see Daddy. Rosie jumped on the king-size bed as Remy unpacked their tiaras. Can we swim later? Briar smiled, removing her heels. Only if we finish our hair and dress fittings first. Back in her private dressing suite, Briar stood still as her stylist, Layla, worked silently around her. Let me guess, Layla murmured, pinning the final stitch on the gown's slit. This isn't just about the dress, is it? Briar arched a brow. What gave it away? The way you requested read. Bold? More like warning. Briar didn't flinch. Let them look. Let them whisper. I've bled quietly for years. I owe myself this entrance. Layla chuckled under her breath. Well, sweetheart, this entrance might stop hearts. The dress was sculpted crimson silk, off-shoulder, with a slit that threatened to expose secrets. It clung to her in ways that demanded respect, not permission. Her heels were sharp, her earrings subtle but pointed, and her lipstick? A daring red she hadn't worn since her wedding day. She looked in the mirror and whispered, "This time, I'm not dressing to be loved. I'm dressing to be remembered." Downstairs, her driver waited with a private car. She walked the girls out, both in their matching ivory gowns, silver tiaras glinting beneath the late afternoon sun. Rosie held a small bouquet of baby's breath. Remy clutched her teddy bear. Briar held their hands. And together, they stepped into the city, a mother and her daughters cloaked in grace and fire. As the car pulled up outside the Delacroix estate, Briar didn't flinch. The place hadn't changed. Still a monument to Harvey's ego. Still towering with glass, marble, and perfectly trimmed hedges that symbolized perfection over peace. But this time, she wasn't stepping out of a luxury car as his wife. She was stepping out as his consequence. Guests fluttered around the estate lawn. Photographers snapped away. No one recognized her, yet. Not until she climbed the front marble steps. A hush followed. A few heads turned. Then more. Then silence. Because standing there in crimson, flanked by two glowing girls in white, was not the ex-wife. It was the woman he let go. The Delacroix estate had been transformed into a spectacle of obscene wealth. Champagne flowed from marble fountains. Imported orchids lined the aisle in blushing white. String quartets played in the distance, and crystal chandeliers hung like jeweled thunderclouds above the ballroom entrance. Everyone in attendance carried names that lived in headlines, portfolios, and political circles. The air itself reeked of elitism. And still, everything stopped when Briar walked in. No announcement, no trumpet, just her silhouette against the entrance light. One hand held Rosie's, the other held Remy's, and between them they walked like a trinity, two innocence-bound daughters and the woman who taught them grace without noise. Her dress glimmered. The slit revealed a dangerous length of thigh with each step. Her neckline dipped low, but never desperate. Her collarbones framed defiance. The diamonds on her wrist didn't scream, they whispered. And her face? Calm, gorgeous, untouchable. Harvey was mid-conversation with a state senator when he caught a glimpse. The flute slipped slightly in his hand. He blinked, once, then again. It wasn't just the dress. It wasn't just the beauty. It was her poise, her refusal to shrink, her refusal to perform for the space he built without her. Rosie and Remy smiled up at him, unaware of the stares gathering around them. "Daddy," they chirped in harmony. He crouched down as they ran into his arms. But his eyes never left Briar, and hers never met his. She looked through him like he was glass, like he didn't matter, and it gutted him. From the side, Anastasia Renwick, Harvey's fiancée, approached in her soft white gown. She was everything polite society praised, slim, golden-haired, mannered, a living sculpture. But next to Briar, she looked like an expensive afterthought. "Is that her?" Anastasia asked tightly. Harvey nodded. His throat worked before he could speak. "Yes, and those two little girls, our daughters." Harvey straightened up slowly as Briar walked past him. The scent of her perfume reached him first, warm vanilla and subtle spice. The memory of her laugh hit next. Then the realization. He had underestimated her. He'd invited her expecting peace, polite tolerance, the silent nod of a woman who'd moved on. But what he got was a woman who rose. "Briar," he managed, almost breathless. She turned, just slightly, not enough to acknowledge, just enough to remind him she heard. Across the ballroom, Anastasia slipped her arm into his. Her grip was tight, her whisper sharper. "She's here for a reason. You know that, don't you?" Harvey didn't respond, because deep down, he did know. And it wasn't revenge. It was something worse. It was unfinished. The ballroom didn't fall silent. It recalibrated. It wasn't just that Briar looked stunning. It was the way the room shifted to accommodate her presence. The subtle tilt of attention. The whispered names. The unsure glances toward the groom. She didn't raise her voice. Didn't flash a smile. She didn't need to. Everything about her said, "I'm not here for spectacle. I am the spectacle." A pair of donors from the Delacroix Foundation paused mid-toast to watch her glide across the floor with Rosie and Remy, Their hushed tones carried across the champagne-scented air. "Is that the ex-wife? She hasn't been seen publicly with him in years. She looks unstoppable." Harvey heard all of it. But it wasn't the voices that pierced him. It was the look Briar wore. Not anger, not sorrow, just poise. The kind of poise one builds after surviving a man like him and never breaking. Rosie tugged on Briar's hand. "Mommy, can we say hi to the violin players?" Briar nodded, her voice warm only for them. "Go ahead, but stay where I can see you." The girls skipped off together, their tiaras catching the chandelier light like tiny crowns of rebellion. Briar stood alone now, a sea of murmurs rippling around her. One waiter slowed his steps just to admire her. A senator's wife whispered to her husband, lips barely moving. And Anastasia, still clasped to Harvey's arm, watched it all unfold with a tension that no amount of posture could hide. "She's impressive," Anastasia said finally. Harvey didn't answer. He couldn't. He was still trying to breathe through the sight of the woman he once claimed, the mother of his daughters, now glowing brighter than any woman in that room, including his bride Tobe. He recalled how Briar used to enter these kinds of events with hesitation, carefully choosing where to stand, how to smile, what to say. Now Now she floated like she owned every brick beneath her heels. Because in a way, she'd stood beside him while this empire was built. She had soothed boardroom anxiety. She had sat up rehearsing his pitches. She had carried twins and ambition in the same breath. She hadn't just been his wife. She had been his foundation, and he let her go. Briar's eyes scanned the ballroom, not searching, but taking inventory. She recognized old friends, old enemies, strategic allies who used to nod at her just for show. Now they watched her differently, not as the ex, not as the past, but as something far more complex. Something important. In the corner of the room, one guest, the CEO of a cosmetics brand, walked toward her with a glass of wine. "Briar Delacroix," she said, offering a small nod of respect. "You're glowing tonight." Briar offered a smile, polite but measured. "Must be the silence." The woman chuckled, clearly intrigued. "You've been missed. The foundation hasn't been the same since you left." Briar's eyes flicked momentarily toward Harvey. "Some things fall apart to remind us what we built." The CEO blinked, then raised her glass. To returns, they clinked quietly. From across the room, Harvey couldn't tear his gaze away, not even when Anastasia excused herself to the ladies' room, lips tight and face pale. Not even when a photographer asked him to pose for a pre-ceremony portrait. His fiancée had left the room. His ex-wife had entered it, and everybody noticed which one still had his attention. Harvey stood at the altar, surrounded by an audience dressed in reverence and wealth. Cameras clicked in rhythm. The string quartet transitioned to a familiar romantic prelude. Every detail had been planned to perfection: the imported lilies, the ice sculptures, the speech he would give at the reception about second chances and new beginnings. But none of that mattered now, because across the grand aisle, just behind the last row of chairs, she was there, Briar, crimson, glowing, alive, Rosie on her right, Remy on her left, and suddenly, nothing about this ceremony felt celebratory. The officiant cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" Harvey didn't respond. He couldn't. His hands twitched at his sides. Sweat gathered beneath his collar despite the perfect climate control. His eyes were fixed on her, and it felt like the air had turned heavier. She wasn't just present, she was powerful. No trembling, no faltering, no polite smile for cameras. She met his gaze for the first time, unblinking, unforgiving, and it shook him. Briar leaned down and whispered something to Remy, who nodded and clutched her sister's hand tighter. Then, like they'd rehearsed it, the girls floated, down the central aisle, ivory skirts swaying like clouds. All eyes turned. The music dimmed in comparison to their presence. Rosie smiled at the guests. Remy stared at her father, expression unreadable. And Briar? She followed slowly, deliberately, keeping her pace calm, never rushing, never shrinking. Each step was thunder muffled in velvet. Whispers erupted. The twins. She brought the girls. Isn't that the ex-wife? But Harvey didn't hear them. He saw and remembered everything. He remembered the night they fought in this very hall, her voice breaking as she begged to be heard. He remembered the morning after she left, the empty closet, the echo of her perfume still lingering on the silk pillows. He remembered watching her car disappear through the gates, never imagining it would take years to feel that hole in his chest. And now she stood here, not as a plea, not as a ghost, but as a storm contained within elegance. Rosie reached him first. "Hi, Daddy," she said, beaming. He crouched, struggling to find his voice. "Hi, baby." Remy hugged him without a word, her arms wrapping tightly around his neck. He held her close, but his eyes never left Briar. She stopped a few paces from the altar, didn't cross into ceremonial space. Her boundaries were exact. Harvey stood slowly, placing a hand on each of his daughters' backs. "Thank you," he said, barely louder than a whisper. Briar lifted a brow. "For bringing them," he added. "For coming." She tilted her head, gaze steady. "You asked me to complete the picture," she said softly. "I'm here. The frame, however, is yours to crack." Anastasia stepped into view, finally descending the side stairs in her designer gown. The applause that followed was awkward, delayed, as if the crowd remembered they were at a wedding only after the cue of white chiffon. She looked stunning, composed, her blonde hair twisted into an intricate crown braid. Her lips formed a polite smile as she reached Harvey's side. He kissed her cheek, but it was mechanical. She noticed, and when she glanced past him to Briar, her expression changed. Not jealousy, awareness, the kind that comes when you realize your groom hasn't just seen his ex, he's remembering his wife. The priest signaled for the ceremony to begin. Harvey cleared his throat, nodded once, but something inside him had shifted. The past wasn't behind him. It had just walked in, flawless, uninvited, and unbothered. And suddenly, he wasn't standing in front of a new beginning. He was standing between what he wanted and what he lost. The ceremony hadn't officially started, yet the atmosphere had already shifted. The string quartet resumed their delicate harmony, filling the strained silence with soft notes. But the tension in the air was unmistakable, especially in the front row, where Briar sat, regal and unreadable, as her daughters fluttered like doves between two worlds. Rosie clung to her little satin purse as she skipped toward Anastasia, her face alight with childlike joy. "You're really going to marry Daddy?" she asked, wide-eyed. Anastasia crouched slightly, caught off guard. "Yes, sweetheart, I am." Remy appeared beside her sister. "Will that make you our new mommy?" There was a pause, a long one. Anastasia's smile thinned just slightly. "Well, I suppose I'll be part of your life, yes?" Remy blinked up at her. "But we already have a mommy." Rosie nodded eagerly. "And she's the best." Anastasia chuckled awkwardly, smoothing the front of her dress. "Of course. No one can replace her." From her seat, Briar heard everything. She didn't smile, didn't react. She just watched, measured, composed. Harvey stepped in, clearing his throat. "Girls, why don't you sit with Mommy now? The ceremony's starting." Rosie turned to him. "Daddy, are you happy?" The question landed like a stone dropped into a frozen lake. He crouched to her level, trying to steady his breathing. "Yes, baby, I am." Remy tilted her head. "You look sad." He blinked, swallowed. Weddings are emotional, even for grown-ups. Briar rose slowly and walked toward them. Not rushed, not dramatic. She placed a hand gently on Remy's back. "Come, girls." Rosie grabbed Harvey's hand and gave it a little squeeze. "Even if you're marrying someone else, I still love you, Daddy." His throat tightened. "I love you too." Then she looked up at him once more, eyes big and honest. "Are you still in love with Mommy?" Even Briar froze for a moment. The question wasn't meant to stir chaos. It was just curiosity. Pure. Anastasia's jaw clenched slightly. Harvey opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Rosie, satisfied with her question, skipped back toward the guest seating. Remy followed, silent but watchful. Briar didn't wait for a reply either. She simply turned and walked away. Guests whispered more audibly now. Some leaned in toward one another. Others looked toward the altar, wondering if the man standing there still had his heart anchored to the woman seated among them. A renowned fashion editor muttered to her date, "She carries herself like she owns the estate." A former investor in Harvey's company muttered, "She used to help him run it." Word is, he built the launch strategy off her spreadsheets. Back at the altar, Harvey adjusted his cufflinks, jaw tight. Anastasia took her place beside him. "You're not even pretending to be present," she whispered. His eyes flicked to hers. "I am. Just give me a second. This isn't about her anymore," she said, voice barely above breath. He looked forward again. "You're right." But his tone betrayed him. He wasn't convincing. Not to her. Not to himself. In the second row, Remy leaned over to her mother. "Is Daddy nervous?" Briar looked down at her, brushing her hair back. "Maybe," Rosie added. "Why didn't you marry someone else too, Mommy?" Briar held their gaze a moment longer than expected, then whispered, "Because I didn't want to teach myself how to forget love. I wanted to teach myself how to grow from it." The girls didn't fully understand, but they nodded anyway. Because sometimes children don't need full explanations. They just need honesty. And as the priest lifted his voice to officially begin the wedding, it became clear, to everyone present, this wasn't going to be the celebration anyone expected. The groom looked distracted, the bride looked uncertain, and the woman in the crimson gown looked unshakable. The ceremony pressed forward. But for Harvey, each word from the officiant faded under the noise in his own mind. He was standing at the altar, his bride beside him, surrounded by the most powerful people in his world, and still, it felt incomplete. Not because of nerves, not because of fear, but because Briar hadn't looked at him since the moment she walked in. She hadn't flinched, hadn't smiled, hadn't softened. She'd acknowledged their daughters. She'd honored the occasion with elegance. But him, she treated him like absence. And that disturbed him more than rage ever could. As the priest spoke about love's endurance, Harvey's eyes drifted again. He wasn't subtle, and he didn't care. Briar sat 2 rows behind the altar's left side, her posture relaxed, her gaze focused ahead, not on him, not on Anastasia, but somewhere deeper, a place he used to be welcome in, a place he was no longer allowed near. Anastasia noticed. Of course, she noticed, but she said nothing, not because she didn't have questions, but because she already feared the answers. When the priest asked for the traditional vows, Harvey's voice cracked on the first word. He cleared his throat, adjusted his collar, tried again. "I, Harvey Delacroix." He felt Rosie's eyes on him from the guest row. He saw Remy resting her head against Briar's arm. He remembered Sunday mornings in their old kitchen. Remy trying to crack eggs, Rosie painting her toast with jelly, Briar in an oversized shirt, singing under her breath as she stirred the coffee. That was a lifetime ago, and yet it wasn't gone. Not really. Anastasia's hand trembled as she reached for his. He took it. Politely, mechanically. The words left his mouth, but they lacked conviction. They sounded borrowed. He spoke of love, of honor, of choosing her every day. And all the while, he felt Briar's presence like a phantom heat behind his spine. Not because she moved, not because she watched, but because she refused to. She gave no reaction, no visible emotion, and that haunted him. The officiant turned to Anastasia. She recited her vows confidently, her voice clear, her smile unwavering. But something in her tone felt like she was speaking louder than necessary, trying to fill the silence left by his distraction. When it came time for the ring exchange, Harvey hesitated only a second, a blink, but Anastasia noticed. The guests noticed. He slid the band onto her finger. A perfect fit. An imperfect moment. As applause echoed through the estate, Briar rose slowly, not to leave, not to react, but to guide Rosie and Remy toward the garden doors, away from the crowd, away from the stage. The moment the doors closed behind them, Harvey felt the full weight of their absence like a vacuum. The clapping quieted. The guests began to rise. The string quartet resumed a celebratory piece. But all Harvey could see was the crimson trail left by the woman who walked away without needing to be told twice. He stared at the spot she had vacated, lips parted, breath caught. The same woman who once waited years for his affection, now couldn't be bothered to acknowledge his gaze. He wasn't just watching her leave. He was witnessing the full consequences of letting love decay. And for the first time that afternoon, the reality of what he had done, what he had lost, settled into his chest like ice. Not because Briar left, but because this time, she hadn't even looked back. The ballroom buzzed with congratulations. Laughter bounced off marble walls. Champagne refilled itself in tall flutes. Guests chatted, posed for photos and discussed mergers under the guise of small talk. But Harvey wasn't in the mood to celebrate. He moved through the crowd like a man in search of air, smiling when necessary, nodding at board members, pausing just long enough to keep suspicion at bay, all while scanning the room, until he saw the crimson hem of her dress disappear through a side corridor. He didn't think. He moved. Briar had stepped away for quiet, her daughters still with the nanny. In the garden, their laughter echoing through the glass windows. The corridor she entered was lined with portraits, former Delacroix ancestors whose eyes always seemed to follow. The wall sconces flickered softly, casting gentle light on the polished floor. She stood near a window, arms crossed, not surprised when his voice broke the silence. "You came," Harvey said. She didn't turn. "You invited me." He took a few steps closer. His voice was lower now, stripped of all the public polish. "I didn't think you'd actually come." Briar turned slowly, her expression unreadable. "Why? Because you assumed I'd decline the honor of watching my daughters be paraded down your aisle?" He blinked. "That's not what this was." She let out a soft sound, too quiet to be a laugh, too dry to be humor. "You wanted them there for the photographs, and you wanted me there to complete your image of civility. You sent a wedding invitation like it was a business memo." "That's not true," he said, jaw tightening. "Then what is?" she asked. "Enlighten me." He stepped closer. "I wanted you to see it." "See what?" "What you gave up." Her eyes didn't waver. "I didn't give up anything. I escaped it." Harvey exhaled slowly. "You look different." "I'm not different," she replied. "I'm finally visible." There was a beat of silence. Then he reached up, almost unconsciously, brushing a curl from her shoulder. She didn't move, but she didn't lean in either. "You're still the most stunning thing I've ever seen," he murmured. She tilted her head slightly. "And you're still a man who thinks beauty makes a woman return." His hand fell to his side. "I didn't bring you here to fight," he said quietly. "You didn't bring me anywhere, Harvey. I chose to walk in." The tension between them thickened, not rage, but something far older. He stepped closer again, not touching her, just close enough to feel her breath. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "The house?" He shook his head. "Us." She hesitated, only briefly, then whispered, "I miss who I was when I believed you saw me." His face fell, just slightly. "Briar, I know what this is," she cut in. "You got caught between nostalgia and guilt, and for a moment I became real again in your mind. You were always real." "No," she said. "I was always convenient. And now that I'm not, you don't know what to do with me." The chandelier light from the ballroom filtered faintly into the corridor. It made her dress glow like it was born of embers. Harvey studied her like a man remembering the words to a song he thought he'd forgotten. "You don't miss me?" he asked again. "I miss peace. I miss being touched without conditions. I miss being spoken to like I mattered." He exhaled sharply. "You mattered. Then why did I have to leave to feel it?" Their silence this time was longer, not because there was nothing left to say, but because everything that had needed to be said had been buried beneath years of avoidance. And now, it had all surfaced. He took one final step toward her, his voice softer now. "You're here, wearing that dress, looking like you knew I'd chase you." She didn't smile, but her lips parted slightly. "I didn't wear this for you," she whispered. "Then who for?" "Myself." Then she turned and began walking away. Not fast, not dramatic, just finished. And Harvey, still standing in the corridor, watched her go, realizing this wasn't a moment for a clever response. This was a moment for regret. The door to the corridor hadn't even shut behind Briar before Harvey followed. He didn't announce himself this time. He didn't ask permission. He just followed the echo of her heels until he reached her near the east gallery, an overlooked corner of the estate, dim and quiet, with floor-to-ceiling windows and old oil paintings collecting time on the walls. She didn't turn when he approached. She already knew he was there. "You came after me again," she said, voice low. "You never chased me when it mattered. Now you're chasing shadows." "I'm not chasing shadows," he replied. "I'm chasing the only thing I should have fought for." She turned then, slowly, controlled, her face unreadable. "No, Harvey. You're chasing the woman who learned how to leave without screaming. That doesn't mean you get to romanticize the silence now." He exhaled, jaw tight. Why did you come if you weren't going to give me a moment to speak honestly? I've given you years. You used them to forget. His eyes searched hers, but she wouldn't give him softness. Only truth. You wanted a performance, she said. That's what that letter was. That ridiculous note inside the invitation. You wanted optics, proof that your past applauded your future. I wanted our daughters there. They would have been there, she replied, her voice sharp now. Even if you hadn't added that little flourish at the end, your presence would complete the picture. He rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't know how else to ask. You didn't need to ask. Her voice dropped. You could have just picked up the phone, but you sent a wax-sealed performance request, and now that I didn't fall in line, you're unraveling. He stepped closer, voice taut. Because you still affect me. I'm not a drug, Harvey. You don't get to blame me for how you feel. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. How did I never see this version of you when we were together? You saw her, she replied. You just didn't respect her. You liked the quiet version better. The polite one. The one who smiled in photos and apologized when your voice got cold. He winced. You think I wanted that? I think you didn't care enough to ask. The room settled into a thick silence. Outside the window, lights from the garden flickered. Somewhere down the hall, laughter spilled from the reception. But here, everything stilled. Harvey's voice dropped. When I saw you today, I didn't feel like a man getting married. I felt like a man watching a fire he once lit burn in front of him, and realizing he never knew it would survive without him. She blinked once, slowly, then stepped toward him, voice soft but razor sharp. I didn't survive you, Harvey. I outgrew you. The breath left his chest in one slow exhale. I never stopped wanting you, he said. You stopped choosing me. He looked down. I didn't know how to balance all of it. She gave a half nod. You always had a gift for keeping your empire afloat. You just didn't want to hold both the crown and the woman who helped build it. The gap between them closed in a breath. He reached out, gently this time, hand resting on her waist as if asking for permission. She didn't move away. Tell me you didn't feel anything when I kissed you last time, he said. When we collided in that hallway, just before the ink dried on our divorce, her eyes narrowed. I felt memory. That's different from love. His thumb moved across her waist in a slow, reverent stroke. But it wasn't nothing. No, she whispered. It was something unfinished. He leaned forward, just slightly, their faces close enough to share breath. Can I finish it? She didn't answer. Not with words. But she didn't step away. Not yet. But the air felt charged, dense with things unsaid, moments that had hovered too long in unfinished corners. Harvey's fingers were tentative on her waist, like he knew any pressure would be met with fire. She should have stepped back. She didn't. Their faces hovered inches apart. Her breath grazed his lips. His eyes moved between her mouth and her eyes, asking a question he didn't know how to speak out loud. And still, she didn't move. The kiss happened without warning. Not soft, not violent, just inevitable. His mouth captured hers like a man finding air after years underwater. Her lips responded with equal force, controlled but not uncertain. Her hands moved to his chest, not to push him away but to steady herself. Because the moment felt disorienting, familiar in the worst way, devastating in the best. Harvey pulled her closer, deepening the kiss. His body remembered her without hesitation, the curve of her lower back, the slope of her spine, the rhythm of her sighs. But this wasn't nostalgia. It was something else, something buried and restless. She moaned quietly against his mouth, the sound catching between their bodies like a secret. His hand slid along the slit of her gown, fingers brushing bare thigh. She gasped. You wore this for a reason, he breathed against her ear. I wore it for me, she replied, voice tight. But I don't mind letting you suffer for it. He chuckled, then kissed her again, harder this time, more desperate. She let him. For a moment. When they broke apart, their chests rose and fell in uneven rhythm. His forehead pressed to hers. I shouldn't want you like this. But you do. I can't marry her now, he said. Not after this. She stepped back slightly, just enough to break the magnetic pull. You already married her, Harvey, with your vows, your promises, your silence. He looked at her like she just pulled the floor out from under him. I meant what I said to you. I know, she said. That's the part that makes it worse. He reached for her again, slower this time. Hands trembling now, not with lust but with uncertainty. Her body leaned into his instinctively. Years of habit, years of ache. But her mind screamed. This wasn't her home anymore. This wasn't her man. This wasn't her moment. It was a temptation, not a truth, and she had promised herself never to trade healing for heat. She moved away, not with anger, but with clarity. Harvey stood still, arms loose by his sides, looking at her like a man who did just touch something holy and knew he could never deserve it again. Briar smoothed the side of her dress, reclaimed her breath. Some things don't get resolved, she said quietly. They get remembered. He nodded once, swallowed. Is this goodbye again? She held his gaze. It's what you should have said the first time you let me walk away. And with that, she turned and walked down the corridor. Her steps were even. Her heart wasn't. But her decision was clear. She wasn't his anymore, and she wouldn't let one kiss convince her otherwise. The music drifted upward from the ballroom below, muffled by marble and distance. Briar stood in the hallway outside the guest suite, staring at the ornate brass doorknob like it was a decision she hadn't agreed to make. Harvey had led her here. Quietly, carefully. He hadn't begged. He hadn't touched her again. He just walked, glanced back once, and waited. And she followed. The door closed with a soft click behind them. The room was drenched in gold light, lamps lit low, shadows stretching over soft sheets. She remembered this suite. It used to be her retreat when the boardroom became too loud or the public appearances too suffocating. Now it was foreign, familiar only by memory. She turned to face him. His jacket was gone, his collar unbuttoned, hands at his sides. But his eyes, they weren't confident. They were wide, nervous, because for the first time in his carefully curated life, he didn't know what she was going to do. I should leave, she said quietly. He nodded. Then why haven't you? She didn't answer. Instead, she walked toward the window, her reflection catching in the glass, crimson, wild curls, shoulders pulled back. She looked like a woman on the edge, not of breaking, but of surrender. Harvey moved behind her slowly. No sudden gestures, no assumptions, just proximity. You haven't said anything since the kiss, he said. Because I don't want to talk myself out of clarity. Is this clarity? He asked. Or is it fear dressed as control? She turned then. Fully. Her hands were at her sides, open, not clenched. I'm afraid of repeating pain, she admitted. But I'm more afraid of pretending I feel nothing. He stepped forward. Carefully. One breath at a time. You don't have to pretend with me. She reached for the zipper on her dress. Slowly. Deliberately. He froze as the crimson fabric slid off her shoulders and pooled around her ankles. She stepped out of it, standing there in nothing but lace and skin, her body a story of survival written in curves and scars. He didn't touch her. Not at first. He just looked. Not like a man staking claim, but like a man remembering where he lost everything. Then he moved. His hands found her waist. His mouth found her shoulder. She gasped as his lips traced old paths, as his hands relearned the weight of her body. When they reached the bed, it wasn't rushed. He lay her down like she was sacred. No words, just breathing. Just skin. His mouth moved over her ribs, her thighs, the center of her belly where two daughters had once grown. She threaded her fingers through his hair, eyes closed, chest open. And when he entered her, it was slow, deep, reverent, like he was searching for forgiveness in every stroke. She arched into him, not to forget the years apart, but to feel them. Every thrust whispered, I'm sorry. Every moan answered, then show me. The bed creaked. The world disappeared. And somewhere in that hour, they stopped being exes. They became something unnamed. Afterward, he lay beside her, hand tracing the slope of her hip. You're not wearing your ring anymore, he murmured. I buried it in the garden the day your assistant booked your birthday trip, without asking me first. He smiled, sad and small. You really did become fire. I always was, she said, turning to face him. You just stopped noticing the heat. He kissed her shoulder, not hungrily, but with reverence. They lay in silence, her head on his chest, his heartbeat loud beneath her cheek. For a moment the world paused. For a moment, there were no broken vows, no altars, no crimson dresses, Just the sound of a man breathing beside the woman he once lost, and the quiet understanding that nothing would ever be the same again. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It pulsed, not with regret, not quite with peace, but with something fragile and suspended, like truth on the edge of a whisper. Harvey's fingers traced absent shapes on Briar's bare shoulder as she lay next to him, her breath quiet, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. Neither of them spoke for a long while. Then finally she broke the stillness. "I used to lie here beside you, wondering if you'd notice I was drifting." He turned his head toward her, lips parted but voiceless. "I'd wait for you to ask me something real," she continued, her tone low and even. "Ask how I was sleeping, if I felt seen, if I was happy." "I didn't know you needed those things," he said, ashamed. "That's the thing, Harvey. You didn't ask. And I stopped reminding you." She sat up, pulling the sheet across her chest, not to cover modesty, but to build distance. He watched her, propped on one elbow. "I thought I was giving you space to be strong," he said quietly. "I thought if I made the world soft enough, you'd never have to carry the weight again." "But I didn't want soft," she replied. "I wanted partnership. I didn't want to be cradled. I wanted to be trusted." Harvey's jaw clenched. "I trusted you with everything. You trusted me to be supportive, not equal." That landed hard, and it landed honestly. He leaned forward, resting his arms over his knees at the edge of the bed. "You know, the worst part about losing you wasn't the silence." She looked at him, waiting. "It was realizing how loud your absence became, the way your voice echoed in boardrooms I used to dominate, the way your handwriting haunted my kitchen notes, the way Rosie and Remy started asking questions I didn't know how to answer. You didn't try to answer them. I didn't know how to face them without you." Briar turned away slightly, staring out toward the suite's tall windows. The city lights blinked in distant patterns beyond the glass. She wrapped the sheet tighter around her body. "I never stopped loving you," she admitted. "Even when I hated you, I didn't stop loving you." His breath caught. "Then why did it take this for us to be honest?" She met his gaze again. "Because the truth needs space, and we kept filling it with silence." Harvey stood, pacing slowly toward the dresser, his reflection catching in the mirror. "I thought success would keep us safe," he said. "That as long as I kept winning outside, nothing inside could fall apart." She gave a soft, bitter laugh. "But the inside always cracks first." He turned to her. "Would you have stayed if I had tried sooner?" Briar didn't answer right away. Then she shook her head. "No, because staying would have taught our daughters that love should be endured, not nurtured." His eyes welled. He looked down. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know." She stood now too, barefoot on the carpet, stronger somehow, even in her vulnerability. "I didn't come here to break your wedding," she said. "I didn't even come here for closure. I came to see if the woman I've become could survive the place where I almost disappeared." He crossed the room to her, slow, measured. "You didn't disappear, Briar." "I did," she said, "piece by piece. Until I couldn't recognize myself in the mirror, until I could be in the same room with you and feel like a stranger in my own skin." He reached for her hand. She let him take it, but she didn't move closer. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, "but I'd give anything to deserve your trust again." She studied him for a long moment, then leaned forward, pressed her lips to his forehead. "I don't need you to deserve it," she said. "I need you to rebuild it, brick by brick, and not for me, but for Rosie and Remy, so they never grow up thinking love is something that arrives polished." He nodded, barely breathing. "Then I'll start now." "Start with honesty," she said, "with accountability, and with letting go of the version of me you remember." "Because I've changed." His voice cracked. "I see that now. And if you want to stay in my life." She stepped back, voice steady. "You have to meet the woman I am, not the wife you lost." He didn't speak again. He simply watched as she walked across the suite, picked up her gown from the chair, and disappeared into the bathroom to dress. And this time, when the door closed between them, it didn't slam. It didn't echo. It simply settled, like two pages being turned at the same time in separate books. The morning light broke through the windows in streaks of pale gold. Harvey stirred awake in the massive guest suite, one hand stretching toward the other side of the bed, empty, cold. He sat up slowly. The silence hit first, then the truth. Briar was gone. No lingering perfume. No rustle in the sheets. Just a carefully folded crimson gown draped over the chaise near the window, and on the nightstand, a small cream-colored envelope. No wax seal this time. No theatrics. Just his name, handwritten in steady strokes. He picked it up with unsteady hands. Inside, a single note. No greeting. No signature. Do not confuse intimacy with return. What we shared last night wasn't about revenge. It was a reminder. Some things break quietly, but rebuilding requires noise. If you're willing to make that noise, for yourself, not for me, you'll find me at the table where legacy is earned, not inherited. His throat tightened. No threats. No promises. Just clarity. She hadn't come to destroy his wedding. She hadn't come to seduce or shame him. She had come to remind him that she was never a footnote in his story. She was a chapter he abandoned, but who continued writing without him. Downstairs, the estate buzzed faintly with the sound of staff clearing the remnants of the celebration. The reception had ended hours ago, guests filtering out long before midnight, tension thick and unspoken. Anastasia had slept alone. And Harvey, he hadn't returned to the ballroom. He'd stayed here, with Briar, and now she was gone. He moved to the window and stared out over the city. Somewhere out there, she was already in motion, probably with the girls, probably headed back to her own rhythm. A rhythm he no longer dictated. The weight of that realization pressed harder than any business loss, harder than any scandal. He had shared her body last night, but he hadn't touched her future. He walked to the wardrobe and pulled out a clean shirt, buttoning it without thinking. His hands moved mechanically, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying her voice, her eyes, the way she hadn't tried to hurt him, only hold up a mirror. And in that mirror he saw it. Not just the man he'd become, but the one he never allowed himself to be. He folded the note and placed it in his inner jacket pocket, not to discard, but to carry, not as guilt, but as compass. As he exited the suite, one of the staff members passed by, pausing awkwardly. "Mr. Delacroix, your wife is waiting downstairs." He cut her off gently. "No, she's not my wife." The woman blinked. "I meant—" He shook his head. "It's all right." And he walked past, down the corridor, down the stairs, through the doors of the ballroom he once built to dazzle. No longer dazzled, no longer distracted, just a man who finally understood the difference between a celebration and a covenant. The air inside the chapel was too still. Anastasia stood at the altar, her gown cascading in layers of soft silk, her hands wrapped tightly around a white bouquet, no longer trembling with excitement, but with impatience. Guests filled the pews once again, waiting for the final part of the wedding to begin. Some fanned themselves delicately. Others whispered, eyes flitting toward the entrance with growing concern. Harvey was missing. The priest adjusted his vestments and checked his watch. The pianist glanced up from her bench, confused. She had already cycled through the same romantic prelude 3 times. Still, no groom. The doors remained shut. Anastasia kept her face composed. She'd been trained for moments like this, how to smile through tension, how to keep her chin high. But this wasn't a press conference. This wasn't a staged appearance. This was supposed to be a wedding. Her wedding. And the man she was to marry had disappeared after a public, too long conversation with his ex-wife and a reception that had turned cold before the champagne flutes were even cleared. She turned slightly to her maid of honor. "Where is he?" Anastasia whispered. The woman gave a helpless shrug. "I haven't seen him since last night." Anastasia's jaw tensed. "Find someone. Now." Her voice didn't rise, but the threat beneath it was undeniable. At that same moment, the back doors of the chapel opened. But it wasn't Harvey. It was Rosie and Remy, dressed again in their matching ivory dresses, small tiaras still nestled in their curls. The room hushed. Behind them, calmly, silently, walked Briar. No gown this time. She wore a soft navy jumpsuit, tailored and elegant. Her presence was no less commanding, no less magnetic. She didn't speak. She walked directly down the aisle, daughters at her sides. People shifted in their seats, unsure whether to smile or panic. Anastasia's eyes narrowed. "What is she doing?" She whispered aloud. The priest watched cautiously as Briar approached. Rosie stepped forward, clutching a sealed envelope in both hands. "This is from our dad," she said sweetly. The priest took it, uncertain. Briar said nothing. She simply stepped back, allowing her daughters to return to her side. And then she stood there, still, calm, waiting. The priest unfolded the note. His eyes scanned the lines slowly. His hands trembled. He cleared his throat, lifting his voice to address the guests. "There has been a change," he said gently. "The groom has submitted a personal statement to be read aloud before the ceremony proceeds." A wave of murmurs flooded the chapel. Anastasia turned sharply. "What statement?" The priest looked at her with regret. He insisted it be read without delay, and then, without waiting for permission, he began. "I, Harvey Delacroix, acknowledge that I am not in a state of emotional readiness to proceed with this marriage. While I have deep respect for Anastasia and what she represents in my life, I cannot, in good conscience, stand at this altar and make promises I'm not prepared to keep. I have recently confronted the truth that I am still emotionally, mentally, and physically connected to my ex-wife, Briar Delacroix. Our connection is unresolved not by circumstance, but by my failures to give her the attention, partnership, and respect she deserved. To proceed with this wedding would be dishonest, not just to Anastasia, but to myself, my daughters, and every person in this room. I deeply apologize to all present. I apologize most to the woman beside me, but this ceremony must not continue." Gasps echoed, then silence. Then the bouquet fell from Anastasia's hands, landing softly against the altar steps. She turned slowly. Her eyes glassed over, her voice catching in her throat. "I see," she said quietly. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She simply stepped down, heels echoing through the stunned chapel, and walked straight down the aisle, past Briar, past Rosie and Remy, past guests who parted without a word. The doors opened. She disappeared into the daylight. The priest folded the letter with shaking hands. Briar turned to her daughters. "Let's go." They nodded. No one stopped her. No one dared. She walked out the same way she had entered, graceful, untouched, and absolutely certain of who she was. This time, she hadn't been invited. This time, she had delivered the truth, and left with it. Harvey stood behind the chapel wall, just out of sight. "Hello, my amazing family. Quick pause before we dive deeper. I'd love for you to be part of this journey. If you're enjoying what you've seen so far, hit that like button to let me know. And drop a comment with your thoughts or questions. I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what's coming up next, because trust me, it's only getting better from here. Your support really helps this channel grow, and it makes all the difference in bringing you more content you'll love." He hadn't planned to stay hidden. He hadn't planned most of this. But when Briar left his suite that morning, gown slung over one arm, voice steady but eyes unreadable, he knew. The ceremony wasn't going to happen, at least not the one written into the program. He had sat at the desk in the corner of the room for over an hour, writing and rewriting the letter. No legal team, no PR phrasing, just the truth. When he finally sealed it, he handed it to a trusted staff member and asked one thing: "Make sure Rosie gives it to the priest. She'll know when." Then he stood in the hallway and listened as the priest's voice broke the silence. Listened as his confession scattered into the crowd like wind against polished glass. Listened as Anastasia walked out without looking back. He didn't follow her. He couldn't. Because what shattered wasn't just a wedding, it was a lie that had overstayed its welcome. Now, from behind the carved wood panels and flowered archways, Harvey stepped out into the aisle. The guests turned, not with applause, not with admiration, but with quiet curiosity. They had seen him fall apart in slow motion, and they were wondering what came next. He didn't speak to them, didn't offer an apology or a statement. He walked straight down the aisle toward the doors. Briar had just exited with the girls. He knew she wouldn't wait, but he needed one last chance to look her in the eye. Not to beg, not to bargain, but to understand if anything could still be salvaged. Outside, the sunlight hit him hard. He spotted them at the end of the cobblestone path, Briar walking between the twins, each girl holding one of her hands. A soft wind lifted the hem of Briar's navy jumpsuit. Rosie turned around first, then Remy, then Briar. Their eyes met. Harvey didn't run. He approached slowly, deliberately, like a man arriving not to win, but to show up for the first time. When he stopped in front of her, the girls looked up at both parents, waiting. Neither parent spoke first. Then Briar reached into her small handbag and pulled out a letter of her own. It wasn't sealed. It was folded, slightly creased. She handed it to him without a word. Harvey opened it. Her handwriting, clear, slanted, familiar. You always controlled the moment, the rooms, the pace. So I waited until the moment controlled you. This wasn't about ruining your wedding. It was about reminding you that unfinished stories don't get rewritten. They demand new authors. The girls and I are not part of your past. We're part of the mirror you refuse to face. If you're ready to start again, not with the man you were, but the father you want to be, you know where we live. But if this was just a performance, let it end here. He folded the letter, slowly, deliberately. His hand was trembling, but his gaze held hers. Briar didn't smile. She didn't frown either. She simply waited. Rosie and Remy clutched her fingers a little tighter. Are you coming with us, Daddy? Remy asked softly. Harvey knelt down to their level, meeting both their gazes. I'm not sure I'm ready to come with you today, he said gently. But I'm going to get ready, every day. For as long as it takes. Rosie tilted her head. Does that mean you're not mad at Mommy? He looked up at Briar. No, he whispered. I'm not mad. Does that mean you're not mad at Mommy? He looked up at Briar. No, he whispered. I'm not mad. I'm grateful. Briar blinked once, but she gave no verbal reply. She simply turned, nodding for the girls to follow. They walked toward the waiting car. Rosie turned to wave once. Remy looked back, then forward again. And Harvey watched as the three people he once thought belonged to his past became the very future he now knew he had to earn. Inside the chapel, the mood had curdled. No one spoke above a whisper. The guests, dressed in designer silence, sat with expressions suspended between curiosity and discomfort. The altar stood empty. The florals, once lush and triumphant, now drooped under the weight of too much stillness. And Anastasia? She stood at the front, veil removed, bouquet forgotten, spine stiff with pride. But her eyes had glassed over. Her maid of honor returned from the vestibule, shoes clicking softly across the marble floor. She leaned in and whispered something. Anastasia barely moved. Then, slowly, she turned back to the pews. A full room of witnesses, and not a single soul could meet her gaze for long. Her father sat 2 rows deep, jaw clenched, watching her like a public investment gone wrong. Her mother avoided eye contact entirely. No one reached out. No one stood. She was alone, surrounded. Anastasia took 1 step forward, then another. Her train rustled against the floor as she descended the altar. She didn't cry. She didn't falter. She walked down the aisle with the same elegance she'd practiced for weeks. But this time, it wasn't toward a future. It was away from a fiction. At the end of the aisle, a photographer, young, unsure, holding a trembling camera, snapped a frame. She stopped, looked directly at him, and said, calm as a blade, delete it. The camera lowered. He nodded. She stepped past him and through the open chapel doors. No flourish, no drama, just a woman exiting the stage she hadn't realized was never hers to begin with. In the lobby, a PR rep tried to approach her. Miss Renwick, if you'd like, we can release a... Don't, she said, brushing past. You may want to control the narrative. She turned abruptly. She reached the front steps just as the valet pulled up in a sleek black town car. She slid inside, lifted her phone, and tapped out a single message. Then turned it off. Not airplane mode. Off. Back inside, Harvey re-entered through the side doors. The guests turned again, this time not in anticipation, but in uncertainty. He walked to the altar, took no microphone, made no speech. He simply stood there for a moment, looking at the space where Anastasia had been, then turned to the pews. I'll understand if you all want to leave, he said. And that was it. No apology tour, no justifications, just truth, dropped like a stone into the center of the room. A few guests stood immediately, quietly, dignified exits. Others followed. One by one, the room emptied, until it was just Harvey, the priest, and a couple of distant relatives who remained seated out of confusion more than support. He walked past them all, past the aisle he had once imagined walking with a new bride, past the doors that had been decorated for joy, and out into the fading afternoon. Outside, the press had started to arrive. Whispers, cameras, questions. He ignored them, stepped into his car, closed the door, and for the first time in a very long time, He let the silence be real. No performance, no spin, no script. Just a man sitting in the aftermath of the truth. By morning, the world had already decided what happened. The headlines weren't gentle. They were loud. They were surgical. Tech tycoon Harvey Delacroix abandons bride at the altar. Ex-wife Briar reappears. Wedding ends in chaos. Renwick humiliated. Delacroix's past comes back to haunt him. It didn't matter that no one had the full story. It didn't matter that the letter wasn't leaked, yet. The images alone told 1,000 stories. Anastasia descending the aisle alone. Harvey standing blank-faced at the altar. Briar, hand in hand with their daughters, walking out of the estate. He didn't check his phone for the first 24 hours. He didn't go online. He didn't respond to the 6 missed calls from his corporate board, the 2 from his mother, or the dozens from journalists pretending to be friends. Instead, he sat in the guest house behind the estate, alone, no staff, no distractions, just quiet and consequences. The following day, his assistant appeared unannounced, cautious, nervous, carrying 2 folders, one marked press, the other internal. "I've filtered the coverage down to what's most urgent," she said gently. He didn't look up. She placed both folders on the table, then hesitated. "There's a lot of speculation. Some investors are concerned about your judgment. The Foundation's gala might be in jeopardy if you don't issue a statement." He nodded. "I'll handle it." She lingered a moment longer, then asked, "Do you want to see the clip?" "What clip?" "The video. Someone caught Briar walking into the chapel, and the priest reading your letter." He closed his eyes. "No," he said, "not yet." Elsewhere in the city, Briar sat in her sunlit office with Rosie and Remy curled up in the corner reading storybooks. She hadn't given an interview, hadn't answered a single call. She didn't need to. The media was doing what it always did, reshaping reality into entertainment. But her reality wasn't shaken. She had her daughters, she had her firm, and she had her name. Everything else was noise. Still, her silence became its own headline. Briar Delacroix refuses to comment. Is she the real winner in the Delacroix disaster? Power, poise, and pettiness, what we know so far. At the Delacroix Foundation's downtown headquarters, a board meeting was called. Harvey arrived alone, dressed in muted tones, eyes clear but tired. He took his seat at the head of the long glass table. One board member leaned forward. "Is there going to be a restructuring of public leadership?" Harvey looked around. "I'm not resigning," he said plainly. "And the Foundation gala?" Another asked. "Do we cancel?" "No," he replied. "We elevate it." "How?" He folded his hands. "Bring Briar back." As co-chair, the room shifted. Whispers. Raised brows. "She hasn't worked with us since the divorce," someone pointed out. "She built this foundation with me," he said. "The work has never stopped being hers. We just stopped acknowledging it." Silence. Then someone finally asked the question lingering in the room. "Are you doing this to fix your image?" Harvey met their eyes directly. Later that evening, he drafted a letter. Not for the press, not for investors, for Briar. Not handwritten, not rehearsed, typed, clean, 1 page. He read it 3 times, didn't edit it, then sealed it and sent it by courier. She received it the next morning, opened it, alone. The words were simple. "No apology can rewrite the past, but I am done performing clarity while living in contradiction. You said rebuilding takes noise. This is me, hammer in hand. Not for us, not yet, but for the future we both put in the world. I'm ready to build. If you are too." She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She folded the letter once and placed it into the drawer beside her desk, next to the invitation that started all of this. Then she looked out the window where her daughters played in the garden. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt like the past wasn't chasing her anymore. It was finally trying to catch up. Briar sat in the quiet of her living room, barefoot, robe draped loosely over her. Shoulders, the steam from her untouched tea rising in thin, delicate strands. The girls were napping upstairs. Outside, the city pulsed with its usual hum. But in here, everything was still. Not peaceful, just suspended. The kind of stillness that follows after impact, where the dust hasn't yet settled, and the body is waiting to feel whether it's bruised or just breathless. Everyone seemed to think she'd won. Social media called her poised, strong, Strangers referred to her as a symbol. Her inbox was flooded with messages from women she didn't know, thanking her for the example, calling her brave. She didn't feel brave. She felt hollowed out, not because she regretted anything, but because survival wasn't supposed to feel like silence. The truth no one told you was that choosing yourself, even when it's the right thing, still came at a cost. The noise might subside, the headlines might change, but the body remembers. It remembers every time it wanted to be held and wasn't. Every moment it waited to be chosen, only to watch someone else be handed your place. Every night you tried to sleep next to someone who had already let go of you silently, months before the paperwork caught up. She walked to the shelf by the window and ran her fingers along the spines of old photo albums. There was one in particular she never opened anymore. Their wedding album. Harvey in a charcoal tux. She in the dress her aunt had sewn by hand. Both of them young, hopeful, smiling like they knew how their story would end. She pulled it out, flipped through the pages without breathing too deep. There it was, his hand resting on her waist, her head on his chest. A look that could almost be called love, or something close. She closed the album and returned it to the shelf, then turned and looked out the window. In the garden, the girls were awake now. Rosie was chasing Remy around the fig tree, both barefoot, both laughing. Their joy was untouched, still intact, and that, more than anything, was what she had preserved. Not a victory, but a legacy. She stepped outside, the morning light warm against her face. The girls ran to her immediately. Rosie clung to her leg. "Mommy, can we have a picnic tonight?" "Only if you help me make the sandwiches," she said, smiling. Remy grinned. "Peanut butter and banana?" Briar nodded. "And apple slices." The girls ran off again, shouting menu ideas to each other. She stood in the middle of the garden, arms folded gently across her chest, taking in the sight of what she had fought for. Not Harvey, not a second chance, not revenge. Clarity, freedom, dignity, and in protecting those, she had given her daughters something stronger than a fairy tale. She had given them the truth, that love can fail, that people can fail, but you never have to fail yourself. Later that evening after dinner, she read them both to sleep. Rosie curled into her side. Remy whispered, "Are we going to see Daddy again?" Briar brushed a curl off her daughter's forehead. "Yes, baby, you are. Do you still love him?" She didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "I love what he helped create. And us. You two are my favorite people in the whole wide world." When they slept, she lingered by the doorway a while, then closed the light. Downstairs, her phone lit up with a message. From Harvey. "I'm not asking to come back, just asking where to begin." She stared at it. Didn't respond. Not yet. Some things weren't endings. They were spaces, waiting to see if anyone had learned how to build without shattering. The next time Harvey saw her, it wasn't in a ballroom. It wasn't in the gleam of chandeliers or the shadow of regrets. It was at a modest coffee shop on the east side of the city, a place where no one cared who he was. She sat by the window already when he walked in, hands wrapped around a ceramic mug, hair swept into a low knot, simple gold hoops in her ears. Not a woman dressed to impress, but one who didn't need to. He paused a beat before approaching. "Thank you for meeting me," he said. She looked up, expression unreadable. "Let's get something clear," she began, her tone measured. "This isn't a reunion." He nodded once. Understood. She gestured to the seat across from her. He sat, unsure what to do with his hands. The silence between them stretched, not heavy, but not soft either, like standing at the edge of a pool and wondering if the water will burn. "I've been thinking a lot," he said finally. "Good. Thinking is overdue." He swallowed. "About the girls, about how I failed them, failed you." Briar didn't flinch. "You didn't fail me, Harvey. You made choices, repeatedly, thoughtfully, with full awareness of what those choices would cost. Don't insult either of us by calling it a failure." He breathed in through his nose, then nodded. "I'm not asking you to forgive me." "Good," she said again. "I'm asking for a chance to show up. For them, you should have done that the day they were born." "I know." Her fingers tapped once against her mug. A quiet rhythm. "I'm not interested in co-parenting fantasies," she said. "I'm not looking for harmony because it photographs well. You want access to your daughters? You earn it. I will." Her eyes narrowed. "You say that now? Then let me prove it." She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim, printed schedule. Remy has speech therapy twice a week. Rosie does ballet on Thursdays. Saturdays are non-negotiable. We do garden mornings together, then library hours. You may attend, if invited, but don't disrupt our rhythm. He leaned forward slightly, eyes scanning the calendar. You keep all this going alone? Her look was sharp. I've always kept it going. You just weren't paying attention. The waitress came and refilled their cups. Harvey barely noticed. He rubbed his palms together, nervous. There's a father-daughter event next month at their school, he said. I saw it in the newsletter. Breyer raised an eyebrow. You read the newsletter? He nodded. Every word. They didn't tell me you'd been added to the parent list again. I asked the school directly, requested it quietly. I didn't want to disrespect you by assuming. She sat back, arms crossed now, guarded. What do you want from all this, Harvey? Really? He exhaled. I want to know them, not just as names on a birth certificate. I want to know what makes Rosie tick, why Remy prefers socks that don't match. I want to know their bedtime stories and the weird way they argue over whose teddy bear snores louder. And me? He looked at her, really looked. I want to earn the right to sit across from you and know that I've made something whole again. The table between them held more than coffee. It held memory, regret, fractured love, but also the faintest, most delicate thread of possibility. She looked out the window for a long time. When she turned back, her voice was lower. They've asked questions, you know. I figured. Remy wanted to know if you were allergic to birthday cake. Rosie thinks you live on an airplane. He smiled, bittersweet. I deserve worse. I told them. You were learning how to be brave. That stopped him. His throat tightened. Brave? She nodded. Because showing up after leaving? That's harder than disappearing. He nodded slowly, swallowing the weight of her words. I'm willing to meet on your terms, he said. Good, because that's the only way this happens. They sat for another 30 minutes, talking not as ex-spouses, not as enemies, but as people who had wrecked something once and were now standing in its ruins, quietly asking if rebuilding was even possible. She didn't smile when she stood to leave, but she didn't walk away without saying, I'll text you the school event details. Don't be late. That evening, Harvey opened a drawer in his penthouse. Inside were dozens of old mementos, things he once thought he'd buried. A drawing from Rosie, stick figures labeled me and Mommy. A lost sock Remy used to call Pajama Bunny. He held them with hands that had signed billion-dollar deals and orchestrated global mergers, but never once held his own life with such intention. Later, he sat by his window overlooking the skyline. The city hadn't changed, but he had. And if Breyer's words were any signal, she wasn't closing the door. She just wasn't handing him the key. Not yet. He'd have to build the lock and prove he was worth opening to again. Breyer never imagined she'd walk those marble steps again. The Delacroix Foundation headquarters was a fortress wrapped in glass and legacy. For years she'd helped architect the public image that made it so revered. And for years after, her name had vanished from the donor plaques, her ideas repackaged without credit, her presence erased like a stain. But this morning, her heels tapped against the floor with quiet certainty. She wasn't here to beg. She was here because he had invited her. The receptionist recognized her immediately and rose halfway from her seat, eyes wide. Miss Breyer, the young woman stammered. Mr. Wayne said you'd be coming. The boardroom is ready. Breyer nodded. Thank you. She didn't need an escort. Her muscle memory took over, past the modern sculpture, left at the glass atrium, elevator to the executive level. As the door slid open, she caught a reflection in the mirrored steel. Different woman. Same fire. Inside the boardroom, Harvey stood at the far end of the long table. He wasn't in a power stance. No arms crossed. No theatrics. He simply waited, a quiet gravity in his posture. When she entered, he pulled out the chair beside his, not across. Beside. She took the seat without a word. I read your proposal, he said, sliding a binder toward her. Twice. Then you know I'm not asking for a favor. I wouldn't insult you by assuming. Breyer flipped the binder closed. Then what are we doing here? Harvey leaned forward, folding his hands on the polished wood. We need leadership the Foundation trusts, someone who understands the mission from its roots, not just the headlines. She studied him, expression unreadable. The board doesn't trust you? They tolerate me. They respect my portfolio, not my pulse. He paused. They trust you. Breyer's eyes swept the boardroom. Every memory hit like a flashbulb. Heated discussions, long nights, policy fights, champagne toasts. She had built this legacy from the inside. She had handed over that power once, for love, for sacrifice. And it had cost her everything. Now it stood before her again. Harvey's voice cut through her thoughts. You belong here. Her silence stretched long enough to make him shift. Then she asked, why now? Because I see clearly now. Because the girls need to know their mother didn't walk away. And because the foundation needs vision, not vanity. You think I care what the foundation needs? I think you care about purpose, he replied. And I think you're done letting that purpose be controlled by anyone else. She exhaled slowly, arms crossed. Let's be clear, Harvey. I'm not returning to clean up anyone's mess. If I come back, it's as an architect, not an ornament. Agreed. I speak, I vote, I drive direction. Absolutely. No seat fillers, no PR smokescreens, and no oversight. You answer only to the mission. Their eyes met, and something old flickered between them, respect forged in fire. Then you'll need to reintroduce me to the board, she said finally. They're gathering next week. I'll need the platform notes, access to the financials, the updated bylaws. You'll have everything. She stood, tucking the binder under her arm. Then she looked at him, not as a man she once loved, but as a man who had finally learned to listen. You may have built the empire, Harvey, she said, voice low, but I laid its foundation. I know, he replied, and I'm ready for you to lead again. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual indifference, but Breyer's steps felt different, grounded, not just a mother anymore, not just a woman with history, a leader returning to the table on her terms. 3 days later, the internal memo hit the inboxes of every board member. Subject, strategic reintegration. Miss Breyer Monroe from Office of the Chairman. Effective immediately, Breyer Monroe has been appointed as Executive Director of Legacy Strategy for the Delacroix Foundation. All queries regarding grant disbursement, community partnerships, and ethical oversight are to be routed through her office. The email ended with Harvey's signature. No flourish. No public relations quote, just acknowledgement. Breyer didn't issue a public statement. She didn't need to. That evening, after she'd reviewed the reports and met with her new department heads, she stepped out onto the balcony that overlooked the city. Rosie had drawn her a picture that morning, stick figures under a banner that read, Mommy is the boss now. She'd folded it neatly and tucked it into her notebook. Remy had whispered before school, tell the building to listen to you, okay? She had promised she would. And now, here she stood, not returning to something but reclaiming everything. Inside the penthouse, Harvey stood at his own window, watching the lights flicker across the skyline. He didn't expect praise, didn't need it. All he wanted was what was finally beginning, a future they both commanded, separately perhaps, but in alignment. He would not lead over her. He would lead beside her, where he should have stood all along. The boardroom at the Delacroix Foundation was full, 18 seats, all occupied. A quiet symphony of murmured greetings, subtle nods, and the soft shuffle of papers on mahogany. At the head of the table sat Harvey, but unlike previous meetings, his voice wasn't the first to command the room. That honor went to Breyer. She stood at the digital wall, her tablet linked to the screen, presenting a revised 3-year vision for community reinvestment initiatives. Her voice was steady, crisp, no wasted words. The legacy of this foundation was never built on acquisition, she said, eyes scanning the room. It was built on accountability. We give to rebuild, we invest to restore. And if that mission has been diluted, then this new leadership phase will clarify it. A few of the older board members exchanged wary glances. One cleared his throat, shifting in his chair. But the expansion strategy is already in motion, he began. Do you propose we cut international partners? I propose we reevaluate why those partners were chosen, Breyer replied. If they serve the mission, we deepen ties. If they dilute it, we cut the cord. Legacy without alignment is just a ledger with sentiment. Her words settled with weight, measured, firm. Harvey watched her speak, unfolding like the woman he once loved, but now in full command of her power. There was no hesitation in her tone, no compromise in her posture. She didn't flinch when challenged, nor did she gloat when supported. He'd seen CEOs bluff confidence, He'd seen politicians weaponize charm. But this was conviction shaped by pain and sharpened by purpose. She wasn't reclaiming space. She was reshaping it. When the presentation ended, she returned to her seat beside Harvey. Not across, not beneath. Beside. The chairman of finance cleared his throat. Your framework is compelling, Breyer, but the last quarterly forecasts were based on our current distribution model. If we pivot mid-cycle, we adjust the timeline, not the integrity, she said. And if the donors resist? Another chimed in. They won't, Harvey interjected, his voice calm. They've been waiting for leadership with teeth. A few chuckles scattered around the table, dry but not dismissive. Breyer didn't smile. She simply nodded once and tapped her stylus against her notes. When the meeting adjourned, the room emptied slowly. Conversations lingered in pairs and trios. Breyer stayed seated, eyes scanning a chart in her binder. Harvey waited beside her, respectful of the space she was choosing to occupy. Your plan was bold, he said finally. Bold doesn't equal reckless. I know. That's why it worked. She looked at him then, not with softness, but with a neutral steadiness. You didn't challenge me in there. I didn't need to. You usually do. I used to. He offered a small shrug. Now, I listen. She tilted her head, measuring the truth in his tone. It was unexpected, uncomfortable even, but not unwelcome. In the hallway they walked side by side, neither leading, neither lagging, just coexisting in a moment where hierarchy blurred. I'll need full access to historical grant approvals, she said. You'll have it, and board voting patterns for the last 2 years, already sent to your inbox. She glanced at him. You anticipated the ask? He met her gaze. I've been trying to earn back something bigger than approval. Her footsteps slowed. Don't try too hard, she said. That's when you trip. They parted at the elevator bank. Her to the executive suite, him to the donor luncheon. No awkward goodbyes, no loaded looks. But something new had been seeded. Not trust, not yet, but a pathway. Later that evening, Breyer sat in her office, sleeves rolled, hair pulled back. The windows cast city light across the files she had reopened, cases she'd once championed before they'd been buried under bureaucracy. And now they were hers again. Her assistant knocked. Mr. Wayne sent a note, said you might want this. She passed Breyer a small envelope. Inside was a photo. It was old, taken before the fracture. A moment from an outreach trip in Senegal. Breyer in jeans, smiling mid-conversation with a child. Harvey beside her, mid-laugh, hand shielding sunlight from his face. On the back, he'd written only, that was the last time we got it right. Let's try again, this time with better choices. She stared at the photo for a long moment, then placed it in her drawer, not as a token of nostalgia, but as a checkpoint, a reminder of who she had been, and who she refused to become again. 3 days later, they sat across from each other in a strategy session with the Foundation's education partners. The tone was cautious, but efficient. Harvey led with numbers. Breyer cut through with vision. Where he analyzed, she humanized. Where she challenged, he clarified. No interruptions, no undermining, just synergy. The kind that only happens when egos are checked and missions are shared. Hello, my wonderful and amazing family. This is Dr. Phillips. I trust this story has touched your heart and brightened your day. Now, I want to hear from you. If you're still here with me, drop a big I am with Dr. Phillips in the comments so I know my family is strong and united. Your words mean so much, and your support keeps this community alive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video so together we can keep growing, inspiring, and spreading love. Remember, every time you engage, you're helping us build something powerful and lasting. Stay connected, stay inspired, and always keep love alive. One of the partners leaned over during a break and whispered to Breyer, "You two make a hell of a team." Breyer didn't respond right away, then simply said, "We're learning to speak the same language again." The gala was nothing short of opulence. Held at the refurbished Delacroix Cultural Center, the evening pulsed, with polished marble, hanging gardens, and gold-trimmed ceilings. Beneath the soft chandelier glow, violinists played modern renditions of classical ballads, while guests in designer gownettes mingled over vintage champagne. This wasn't just a celebration. It was Harvey's latest masterstroke, a fundraiser, a PR reclamation, a show of renewed unity between power and philanthropy. But as the cameras flashed and laughter floated like smoke in the air, his eyes searched only for one silhouette. She hadn't arrived yet. Then, as if summoned by breath alone, she entered. Briar, draped in an off-shoulder velvet black gown that glimmered subtly with flecks of midnight blue. Her natural curls were pinned in an elegant twist and around her neck. A slim gold choker that whispered legacy rather than screamed wealth. Conversations paused mid-sentence. One of the donors audibly exhaled, but Harvey didn't speak, didn't move. He simply watched. She hadn't dressed to turn heads. She had dressed to remind the room she wasn't returning. She had risen. They didn't speak at first, not in the hallway, not by the bar, not even during the keynote where Harvey acknowledged restored leadership and evolved stewardship. But their proximity was a language of its own. She stood 2 tables from him. Their hands reached for champagne flutes at the same time once, fingers brushing. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. During the silent auction, Briar leaned against a column near the marble staircase, surveying the room. Harvey approached slowly, not with arrogance, but with presence. "Your proposal for the Youth Literacy Fund stole the night," he said, voice low. She glanced sideways. "Because I backed it with math or because I wore it well?" He smirked. "Both, probably." She turned fully then. Their eyes locked. "No rehearsed lines tonight?" she asked. "None," he replied. Just one truth. He didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. The ballroom dipped into softer tones as the string quartet shifted into a slower rhythm. The crowd, thinned by the buffet, now gathered around the central dance floor. Couples began to drift toward it, arms reaching, feet sliding. Harvey extended his hand. "One dance?" She stared at it for a beat, then looked at him. "You don't get everything just because you're sorry." "I know. And this," she whispered, motioning gently to the crowd, the orchestra, the curated spotlight. "None of this earns anything back." His hand remained outstretched. "I'm not asking for back. I'm asking for now." She placed her hand in his. Not in surrender, but in permission, brief, intentional, clear. Their bodies moved in slow alignment across the floor, not pressed close, but tethered by memory. The world faded for a moment into soft cello and shared breath. Her fingers curled gently around his. His hand stayed firm against the small of her back, steady, respectful, restrained. Their eyes didn't wander. Not once. As the song neared its final bars, he leaned in, not to kiss, but to listen. Her lips hovered near his ear, warm and certain. "Earn it," she whispered. 2 words. Not an invitation, not a challenge, a truth. They parted when the music faded. No applause, no spectacle, but the air between them hummed with something louder than noise. Briar returned to her table, skin warm, fingers tingling. She took a sip of champagne, not to celebrate, but to cool the storm within her. He hadn't kissed her, hadn't begged, hadn't pressed. He danced, and sometimes that was the loudest language love could choose. Later, as the gala wound down and the last speech was made, Harvey passed by her on his way out. Their eyes met again. Just briefly. This time, she was the one who said nothing. But her silence wasn't distance. It was unfinished. The tabloids devoured them. 2 weeks after the gala, Briar and Harvey had made every entertainment column, financial blog, and whispered comment section. Headlines stretched the truth with elastic drama. CEO and ex-wife reignite flame. The gala touch that set billion-dollar hearts ablaze. Briar's back, and wearing power in velvet. Photographers combed cafes in the Upper East Side. Pundits speculated on shareholder impacts. Former board members who once wrote her off now wanted to grab coffee. And through it all, Briar said nothing. Harvey, for once, followed her lead. He made no statements, no clarifications, no PR maneuvering. He let the ambiguity breathe, let it grow. Because this time, his silence wasn't avoidance, it was discipline. They worked together often now, 3 days a week at the foundation, once at the corporate headquarters. Emails, presentations, strategic planning for upcoming philanthropic expansions in West Africa and downtown Detroit. Their conversations were measured, focused, undeniably professional. But behind every slide deck, under every boardroom glance, something brewed, unspoken, unrushed. One morning, Briar stepped into the foundation's elevator, expecting to ride up alone. but the doors slid open to reveal Harvey already inside. She stepped in without a word. He nodded. Brief. The doors closed. 3 floors, tight air, no eye contact. But their bodies were mirrors, still, intent. At the 5th floor, she stepped out. He remained. Only as the doors slid shut did he look up. She didn't turn, but she knew. She always knew when he watched her go. The rumors turned sharper. Paparazzi staked out her brownstone. A journalist attempted to interview Remy's music teacher. An anonymous podcast dropped a speculative inside scoop about their shared elevator rides. That evening, Briar stood in her kitchen, the twins in the next room coloring, as her phone buzzed again with Google alerts. She read the headline aloud, almost laughing. Inside Briar's dangerous game, power, love, and revenge. She turned off her phone. Dangerous? Love? No one understood that it wasn't a game. It was healing, slow, thorned, and earned. The next morning, Harvey stopped by her office under the pretense of reviewing foundation funding tiers. He didn't sit, didn't linger, just passed her a printed proposal and said, "Page 3 has notes." She took it. "Thank you." Their fingers brushed again. Neither of them looked away this time. His hand lingered half a second longer than necessary. And still, he left. No comment, no pursuit. That night, in his penthouse, Harvey stood by the window, drink untouched. City lights blinked like low stars beneath him. He hadn't kissed her, hadn't asked to, hadn't even leaned in. But desire ran through him like a live current, deep, slow, hot. It wasn't lust, not entirely. It was gravity, drawn to her clarity, her refusal to bend, her refusal to belong to him simply because he wanted her. She wasn't a possession. She was presence. In another tower, across the city, Briar lay awake. The twins had long since drifted into sleep, curled together like commas. She stared at the ceiling, her hand resting lightly on her chest. Harvey's silence that morning had spoken more than his apologies ever did. He was learning. Still flawed, still Harvey. But the arrogance had been replaced with something quieter. Want, not command. That made it dangerous, because she felt it too. The next day, a reporter caught Harvey outside the Foundation's parking garage. "Are you and Briar back together?" He paused. No smile, no denial. Just, "She's more than a headline," and walked away. Back inside, Briar read the quote on her phone later that afternoon. She didn't smile, but her fingers tightened around the mug in her hand. The warmth burned in a way that had nothing to do with tea. Their next board meeting stretched late into the evening. Members filtered out slowly, talking in hushed tones and artificial smiles. Briar gathered her papers with methodical ease. Harvey remained behind. Only the two of them. He didn't approach, didn't invade her space. Instead, he asked, "Can I walk you to your car?" She paused, then nodded. In the parking lot, footsteps echoed against polished cement. He opened her door. She slid in. Before shutting it, he leaned slightly, hands still by his sides. "I know I'm not owed anything, not even this walk, but if you ever need space, time, distance, or company, I'll follow your lead." She looked up at him, unblinking, unwavering. "You're not chasing," she said softly. "No. You're not controlling." "No." "Then wait. I will." He closed the door. She didn't look back this time, because something had already begun, not declared, not claimed, but rising. The first autumn rain pattered gently against the window panes of Briar's penthouse. Everything was soft, muted, the kind of quiet that settled only when the past had been spoken aloud, and forgiven in pieces. The twins were asleep, curled up in their beds, unaware that in the next room, a kind of resurrection was happening. Harvey stood just inside the doorway of her bedroom, his coat dripping slightly from the rain. He didn't move forward, didn't assume, just stood there, watching her, waiting. Briar turned from the window slowly, arms crossed in front of her. But she wasn't guarded. She was trembling, not in fear, in memory, and in decision. "I'm not asking for promises tonight," she said quietly. "Not vows, not even tomorrow." "I know," Harvey replied. "I'm not here to win. I'm here because you didn't say no. And if I do now, I'll leave," he said without hesitation. She didn't answer with words, She walked to him, step by step, until the only thing between them was breath. Her fingers found the buttons of his shirt. Slowly, carefully, each one undone like a gate creaking open. The first kiss wasn't hungry, it was reverent. His lips barely grazed hers, like a question, a breath of apology and hope. She kissed back with the kind of softness that makes strong men ache. Her hands moved over his chest, no longer unfamiliar but not yet reclaimed. He lifted her carefully, slowly, and she wrapped her arms around his shoulders as he carried her to the bed. Nothing rushed, no tearing, no surge, just pause after pause. Each movement like a question waiting to be answered. "Is this okay?" He whispered against her shoulder. "Yes," she breathed. "But only if you ask every time." "I will." He did, and she answered, over and over. The rain fell harder outside, a soft percussion that matched the rhythm of a reunion not driven by heat, but by heartache undone. Harvey kissed her collarbone, her jaw, the inside of her wrist. She closed her eyes as his mouth trailed down her skin like scripture, memorizing, not conquering. No part of her was claimed, only cherished. When he finally sank into her, it was with a gasp, one he tried to swallow but couldn't. And she cried, not from pain, not from sadness, but from the ache of being seen again, touched like truth. They moved slowly, every motion soaked in memory, forgiveness, and trembling restraint. No grinding, no thrusting, just joining, melding. He held her face as he moved inside her, and she held his heart without words. Their bodies didn't clash. They conversed. Afterward, he didn't roll away. He stayed wrapped around her, skin to skin, breath to breath. And in the dark, he said the one thing that didn't sound like strategy or lust or agenda. He whispered, "Thank you." She didn't reply, but her fingers in his hair told him everything he needed to know. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Eventually she said, "I still don't trust it all yet. I know. I don't know if I can." "I'll hold space for that," he murmured. "Not pressure. And this doesn't mean I'm yours again." "No," he said gently, "but I'm yours." That made her chest tighten. She'd wanted those words years ago, when they were naive and untested. Now, spoken in the aftermath of collapse, they felt earned, not gifted, earned. He stayed the night, but not for the old reasons, not to possess, not to win, just to sleep beside the only woman who had ever challenged the way he loved. In the stillness, Briar turned toward him, eyelids fluttering. "Do you regret the wedding?" "Every second of it," Harvey replied without pause. "I'm glad." "Me too." She reached out, pressed her fingers against his chest. "I don't need a ring anymore. I don't need to wear mine," he whispered. "But I never took it off." She looked down at his hand. It was true. It was still there. The band she'd chosen years ago, worn smooth with time. She leaned forward and kissed the spot above his heart, then turned away. Sleep found her like a blanket, heavy, peaceful, and Harvey, once the master of control, did nothing but hold her, heart exposed, finally unafraid to feel small in her arms. The quiet hum of the city glowed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Briar lay curled into the curve of Harvey's chest, the heat of his body melting into hers beneath the covers. His arm was draped protectively around her waist, his breath a steady rhythm against the nape of her neck. It was a cocoon, of warmth, of ache, of the confusion that came with being this close to a man she hadn't yet forgiven. She stirred gently, not pulling away but not leaning further in. There was no need to speak yet. The room was too full of unsaid things already. Harvey shifted behind her, brushing a kiss to her shoulder, soft, unsure, not demanding, not persuasive, just present. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice hoarse from the emotional weight of what had passed between them just hours before. Briar turned slowly in his arms, eyes half-lidded but sharp beneath their softness. "I'm not broken," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I know," he replied. She studied him for a moment, as though seeing him not for the man she once married or the man who betrayed her, but for the man lying here now stripped of ego, suit, and smirk. Just skin. Just breath. Just Harvey. She reached up, fingers tracing the edge of his jaw, pausing at his temple, where the faintest sign of gray was beginning to bloom. That hadn't been there before. Neither had the deeper grooves at the corners of his eyes. Time had not passed gently, and yet here they were. "I don't forgive you," she whispered, her thumb brushing across his lips. Not yet. His gaze didn't waver. I know. But my body, she said slowly. It remembered you tonight. I felt that, and that's not the same thing as healing. No, he agreed. But it's a place to begin. He leaned in, their foreheads touching. No kiss. Just the sacred stillness that happens when neither person is reaching to win, but to witness. I wanted to hold you like that for years, he murmured. You didn't deserve to, she replied honestly. He nodded. I didn't. They stayed that way for a long while, the silence between them not empty, but full of a strange new truth, that sometimes closeness came not after forgiveness, but before it. As a step, a risk, a wordless truce. Eventually, Briar's breath began to slow. Her eyes closed, lashes fluttering like pages about to turn. Harvey pulled her in tighter, one hand on her back, the other tangled gently in her curls. Her head rested on his chest. His heartbeat was steady beneath her ear. She wasn't sleeping yet, but she was close. And for once, so was he. No ambition, no schemes, no boards, no media, no legacy to protect. Just the raw vulnerability of a man still praying that he hadn't lost. The only woman who ever knew how to soften the steel inside him. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds peeled open just enough to let the stars flicker above the skyline, distant but real. Inside, under that same sky, Briar whispered so quietly he almost didn't catch it. Not yet. He smiled, because she didn't say never. They didn't need another round of passion. The love scene had already been written, through tears, through slow touches, through the careful act of asking and receiving. What they needed now was what followed after. Stillness, tangled limbs, warmth without demand, breath shared, not taken. Harvey's fingers traced lazy patterns across her back. Briar, eyes closed now, murmured, "Do the girls know you're here?" "No. Will they? I want them to." She nodded faintly, but didn't promise anything. In the dark, he thought of how much easier it would have been to buy her silence, to dominate the narrative, to return with pomp and control. But instead, he'd returned empty-handed. And she somehow let him in anyway, not into her life, not into her future, just into the room, into the bed, into the breath between midnight and morning. "I still hate what you did," she said suddenly, not opening her eyes. "I hate it too," he answered. "That version of you, he's not welcome here. He died the day I saw Rosie ask if she wasn't good enough to be walked down the aisle." Her eyes fluttered open. Tears didn't fall, but something inside her shifted again. "I'm not looking to be rescued," she said. "I know, and I don't want to fall in love with a ghost. You won't. I'm not haunting the past anymore." "Good," she whispered and nestled into him again. "Then maybe I'll sleep." He kissed the crown of her head, and neither of them said another word. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it came wrapped in shared heat, in the quiet rhythm of breath and heartbeat and regret, laced with the faintest scent of lavender from her pillow. And when morning light began to break, it found them tangled, not out of desperation, not lust, not longing, but something simpler, almost forgiven. The chandeliers of the Grand Elysian ballroom shimmered like constellations above the crowd. Soft jazz filtered through the air, mingling with the clink of champagne glasses and murmurs of anticipation. Guests in tailored suits and shimmering gowns filled the tables. The Delacroix Foundation's annual gala had always been a spectacle, but this year it was different. This year it was Briar Delacroix standing at the helm. A polished acrylic podium stood on the center stage, lit by gold-toned spotlights. At the edge of the front row sat Harvey, tailored but subdued, not in the center of attention, but beside it. On either side of him were Rosie and Remy, radiant in matching white dresses, with silver bows at their waists, their curls adorned with tiny floral pins. They whispered to each other, pointing occasionally at their mother as she gracefully approached the podium. "Mommy looks like a queen," Remy murmured. "She is one," Rosie replied, clutching Harvey's hand. Briar stepped into the light. Her emerald gown flowed like river glass, strong and soft all at once. She wore no crown, no extravagance, just quiet elegance and a necklace that had once belonged to Harvey's mother. She looked over the audience briefly, politicians, tech giants, dignitaries, but her eyes eventually settled on just 3 people, her daughters, and Harvey. And then she began. "Good evening. The microphone amplified her voice with a velvet authority, confident, grounded. This time last year, I wasn't even sure I'd attend the gala, let alone speak at it. A soft ripple of laughter moved through the room. She smiled, but only briefly. Because this time last year, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. Not as a CEO, not as a woman, not as a mother, not even as myself. Her hands gripped the edges of the podium. Calm, present. What I knew for certain was that something had shattered, and I didn't want to rebuild it the same way. Harvey leaned slightly forward in his seat. His fingers remained entwined with his daughters as they stared up at their mother with glowing admiration. I realized, Briar continued, that power without purpose is just noise, and legacy without love is hollow. A pause. I didn't come back to reclaim my seat. I came back to reshape it, not just for me, but for the future I brought into this world, Rosie and Remy. The spotlight caught a flicker of wetness in Harvey's eyes. He blinked once, slow. The twins beamed like sunrises. The Delacroix Foundation, Briar said, was never just about influence. It was always meant to be about impact. And tonight, we mark a turning point, not only in funding but in vision. She gestured to the screen behind her, where a new initiative was announced, a program funding. Maternal health care in underserved communities, named the Rosie and Remy Project. The crowd erupted in applause. But Harvey, he stood, only for a moment, clapping, silent, proud. Briar's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. Not this time. I made many mistakes, she said softly. But I learned that rebuilding doesn't start with vengeance or pride. It starts with truth. And for me, the deepest truth I found was this. I never stopped loving who I was before I was broken. I just forgot how to trust her voice. The gala went quiet. Even the clink of glasses halted. She let the silence breathe before finishing. And now, I trust her again. The applause rose like a wave, deafening, genuine, long. Rosie and Remy leapt up and ran toward the stage. The audience parted like water to let them through. Briar bent just as they reached her, catching them both in a hug so tight her mic nearly popped from the force of emotion. When she looked up, Harvey was there too. Not at the podium, not seeking credit, just at the steps, waiting. Later that night, as guests mingled and the media circled discreetly, the four of them sat at a quiet table in the corner of the ballroom. Rosie leaned against her father's arm, sucking on a lemon macaron. Remy twirled the ends of Briar's hair in fascination. No one spoke about the past, because something greater stood in its place. A future. Mom, Rosie asked, licking frosting off her thumb, what does foundation mean? Briar leaned in, wrapping her arm around both girls. It means something strong you build everything else on, she said. Harvey looked at her then, not with apology, not with guilt, but reverence. And is our family a foundation? Remy asked. Yes, baby, Briar whispered. It is now. A new rhythm emerged, not loud, not rushed, deliberate. Harvey and Briar weren't remarried. No headlines screamed reunion. No grand rings were exchanged. No exclusive media coverage trailed them like shadows. But anyone who watched them move through life now, side by side, step by intentional step, knew something had shifted. They were rebuilding. Mornings began with soft boundaries and subtle rituals. Briar no longer lived in the penthouse. Her townhouse in the historical district had warm light, reclaimed wood floors, and silence she had come to cherish. But some mornings, when Rosie and Remy stayed over at Harvey's, she'd arrive early, with black coffee in one hand and reminders in the other. Don't forget their ballet recital is at 3, she'd say, setting the mug beside his laptop. I wouldn't dare, Harvey would reply, brushing her shoulder as he passed her. Not possessively, just present. Work had changed too. At the Delacroix Foundation, they operated like CO leaders of a cause, not ex-lovers untangling heartbreak. Their disagreements were fierce, but thoughtful. At a quarterly board meeting, when Briar suggested cutting executive bonuses to increase community grant funds, Harvey didn't blink. I support that, he said. We're not here to preserve thrones. We're here to build bridges. She blinked once, caught off guard, but she nodded. Mutual respect had returned, not from nostalgia, but earned clarity. Still, rebuilding wasn't linear. On a rainy Tuesday evening, Briar opened her front door to find Harvey standing on her porch, soaked but silent. She didn't invite him in immediately. Instead, she crossed her arms. What happened? He didn't smile. Rosie cried because she thought I wouldn't come to her science fair tomorrow. She's sensitive. I told her I'd be there, but I'm in Chicago until noon. I shouldn't have promised. Briar sighed, her fingers tightening against her cardigan. You can't be careless with them, not even accidentally. I know, he said quietly. I'm not asking you to fix it, just help me not fail again. That night, she rearranged her schedule, picked up glitter glue at the store, and sat beside Rosie as they rebuilt her volcano project from scratch. The next day she FaceTimed Harvey right before the presentation. He watched through the screen, heart in his throat, as Rosie glowed. At bedtime that same evening, Briar lingered at the door of her daughter's room. She had just tucked them in. Their breathing was slowing, little fists curled under cheeks. Harvey stood behind her, tie undone, silence between them. I meant what I said, he murmured. I know. Do you believe me yet? She turned, slowly. I believe that you want to be better. Is that not enough? It's a start. But believing in you and choosing you are two different things. He didn't protest, didn't grovel. He simply kissed her forehead, once, and left. Weeks passed. There were business trips, foundation events, soccer practices, emergencies with broken shoelaces, moments when Briar wanted to scream, moments when Harvey wanted to apologize again and again. But instead of big declarations, there were consistent gestures. She would find notes in the twins' lunchboxes, ones she didn't pack. You've got this, Rosie. Remy, remember, your smile is your magic. And every Friday, without fail, Harvey delivered fresh tulips to Briar's office. Never red roses, never romance-coded, just tulips. Soft, resilient. Her favorite. One evening, at an executive retreat for the foundation, Harvey and Briar ended up in a corner of the rooftop deck. The sun was slipping behind the hills, casting the world in amber. They weren't touching, just sitting on the same bench, knees almost touching. Do you ever miss it? He asked. She didn't need clarification. Sometimes. But not the way it was. Would you ever want it again? She exhaled. Only if it's not built on apology. I don't want to be someone you try to prove yourself to. I want to be someone you grow with. Harvey swallowed hard. Then I'll keep growing. It wasn't a promise. It was a process. By the time spring rolled in, they had settled into something undefined, but undeniable. At school pickups, the twins didn't ask why Daddy drove one week and Mommy the next. They just waved from the back seat, content that both were always present. At the foundation, donors praised their seamless synergy. Power couple, someone joked once at a press dinner. Briar had laughed lightly and answered, just two people doing the work. But under the table, Harvey's pinky grazed hers, and she didn't move it away. That night, after the gala, Harvey walked her to her car. The moon hung low, and their footsteps echoed across the quiet parking lot. You wore green, he said. Felt like growth. You looked complete. I am complete, she replied, with or without rings or titles. He nodded slowly. But I still want to walk beside you, not in front of you, not behind. She stepped closer. Then don't ever stop walking. They stood there, two grown people under starlight, not rushing toward a label, not clinging to old expectations. Just present, choosing, one day at a time. The ballroom shimmered beneath golden chandeliers. Rosie and Remy twirled around their father's legs, giggling in their matching lavender dresses, oblivious to the weight of the moment about to unfold. Briar stood near the stage in a fitted white jumpsuit, simple, unapologetically elegant, and powerful. She wasn't Mrs. Delacroix. She wasn't the ex-wife. She was Briar, nothing added, nothing removed. And tonight, she would speak as herself. The hush in the room was palpable as she approached the microphone. Some of the guests still whispered about her reappearance in the foundation. Others had bet she would fade quietly into anonymity after the divorce. But Briar hadn't crumbled. She had risen, and not in fury, but in form. My name, she began, her voice steady, is Briar Naomi Castell. Not a side note in someone else's success story. Not a footnote to a billionaire's rise, but a whole woman. A mother, a partner in rebuilding lives, including my own. The room stilled. No coughs. No glasses clinking. Only breath. She continued, when I first co-founded the Delacroix Foundation, I did it because I believed wealth meant responsibility. and I still do. But what I've come to understand is that visibility, real, earned, whole, isn't granted by wealth or status or even forgiveness. It's reclaimed. Harvey sat beside the twins at a corner table, eyes locked on her. He didn't look proud. He looked humbled. This was no longer the woman who had needed his name to be heard. She had become the woman who chose when to speak and what silence no longer served her. I've learned that sometimes power isn't found in taking over a room, she said. Sometimes it's choosing not to be erased in one. In boardrooms, bedrooms, ballots, and nurseries, women are asked to give more than they're permitted to keep. We're told to quiet our anger, tone down our brilliance, and be grateful for whatever love comes our way, no matter how incomplete. A murmur moved through the women in the room. But not anymore, she added. She stepped down from the podium and walked past tables of CEOs, philanthropists, heads of media, and rising stars. And no one dared interrupt her silence. She stopped beside Rosie and Remy. Kneeling between them, she whispered, "Never let anyone rename you. Not for love, not for power, not even for peace. Your name is already whole." They nodded, not fully understanding, but understanding enough. Harvey rose from his seat, but he didn't approach. He didn't try to hold her hand. He stood back and watched the woman he once shattered hold herself with grace he couldn't buy, replace, or control. She didn't glance back, but she smiled. That night, when the gala ended, Briar walked out of the ballroom alone. Not lonely, just whole. The next morning, Rosie climbed into her parents' bed, something she hadn't done in weeks. "Mommy," she whispered sleepily, curling between them. "Did you wear the sparkle jumpsuit to make Daddy jealous?" Briar laughed softly, eyes still closed. "No, baby. I wore it so I could feel like me." Harvey turned toward her, pressing a silent kiss to her shoulder. It wasn't an apology. It was something better, acknowledgement. Later, as the morning sun painted their bedroom in soft gold, Briar reached for her phone and posted a photo of the gala, just her, standing at the mic, face lit by the spotlight she no longer feared. The caption was short. "Sometimes, power isn't taking control. It's reclaiming your name with grace." A flood of comments followed, from women who had been erased, from men who wanted to learn, from daughters watching mothers become more than shadows, and from one account, anonymous, but unmistakably him, that simply commented, "You never needed saving. But I'm honored to walk beside your strength." And that, Stanley, is how this story closes, not with declarations or diamonds, but with dignity, with daughters raised by a woman who refused to shrink, with a love that didn't start over, but started right. Thank you for spending this precious time with me here on Love and Twilight with Dr. Phillips. I'd love to hear from you. What spoke to your heart today? Drop your thoughts, experiences, or even your questions in the comments below. Your voice matters, and together we can build a community of hope, healing, and deeper understanding. If you enjoyed this moment, give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs it, and make sure you subscribe so you never miss our next conversation. Remember, love shines brightest when it's shared, so let's keep sharing, connecting, and growing together. Until next time, keep love alive.